Good morning. 1, 2, 3, testing. Perfect. This is a live stream session, which is why we have to start now, right? And you just have to bear in mind that it is going to be streamed globally. Welcome to the session hosted by the World Economic Forum and the CEO Climate Leaders Alliance, Closing the Climate Action Gap. First, I want to thank the co-chairs of the CEO Climate Leaders Alliance. We have a few of them here with us. Feike, who is chairman of the advisory board for Royal Philips, as well as Jesper, who is the CEO of IKEA. We also have Novozymes as well as Swiss Re, who are not able to join us today. And obviously BCG, who's our knowledge partner, and global chair of BCG, Rich. He'll be on stage later, and you'll get to hear more about our work at the Alliance Group. The role of the leaders is a very important one, because when it comes to transformational change, there is a lot that needs to come from peer support and peer leadership, which is why I wanted to start off this session by acknowledging the commitment as well as the work of the leaders of this alliance, because they've been relentlessly lobbying their colleagues, working through the issues to make sure that we can translate the good commitments that has been made into practical action and strategy. This group is 132 companies now. It's been launched 8 years ago, but it's actually a very, very powerful group. Total emissions, 5.2 gigatons. And that's more than the US annual emissions, just to give you a sense of the scale. They come from, they operate in 26 countries. They come from 26 countries and they probably operate globally. I say that because there's already IKEA, and I know IKEA products are everywhere, right? So they operate globally and they come from 12 different industries. So it's a very broad-based group of alliance. The work of the alliance has been very much around taking a very practical approach, looking at the emissions, scopes 1, 2, 3. And when we did a stock take quite a while back, we realized that the CEOs were all struggling with the scope 3 emissions, which is why that was a key priority over the last 1 year. And today you'll get a stock take on where we are on this journey. And I'm also very pleased to announce that we are launching a supplier hub for suppliers, a support hub for suppliers to provide tools and frameworks so that even as the big companies commit on this journey, they can actually bring along the smallholders as well as the SMEs in this journey. But beyond the value chain partnership and support that we provide to each other, a very critical element is how do we actually draw in the policy makers? How do we engage broader communities, consumers, producers in this journey? And one of the key areas of work of the Alliance is also around fostering stronger public-private partnerships, right? And traditionally, we'll always have a CEO letter that goes out during COP that expresses the wishes from the corporate community on how policymakers can better support with enabling frameworks, with the technologies, to support technologies, and most importantly also to harmonize standards across jurisdictions, because that actually eases the cost of doing business, which is a very important aspect when we want to think about closing the nexus between climate transitions, energy affordability, access, and energy security. So it's very critical that we actually have the right policies, harmonization of frameworks, as well as technologies to support that nexus. I will not say more because I would like to invite Rich Lesser, who is Global Chair of BCG, to share with us some of the findings of the report. And then later we'll have a panel of the CEOs and leading executives who will share more about their learnings from the work of the group. Yeah, Rich, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Gimwei. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. This is such an important COP and such a moment to really shift into a higher gear on driving action around the world. And the Alliance of CEO Climate Leaders, more than anything, is a group that's committed to action, not just to understanding the problem or defining the problem, but figuring out how we work together collectively in the business community to accelerate progress and to create a forum where we can both learn from each other and have the opportunity to share ideas and input with the world, policymakers and others, that will enable us to do our jobs better to decarbonize. Every year we write a report. BCG's been a part of this now for a number of years, and every year we write a report to try to focus on one aspect or another. This year we decided, led by my senior partner, Patrick Herhold in the back there, this year we decided that we would write two, because this is the year of the global stocktake. And so we said we'll focus the first report, the one that was issued a couple weeks ago before COP, on where are we really right now, what's going on, and sort of not a stock take, but a sense of where we stand. And then we'll focus the second report on what we do to drive the kind of changes that are needed. I'm going to do a very quick tour through both, and we only have a few minutes, so you'll forgive me for going quickly through that, but let me do that. Let me just start here. This is the bottom line, so we'll start with where we are. The bottom line is GHG emissions in the atmosphere continue to increase, albeit at a slightly slower pace, about 1.5% a year, at a time when we need to be going down at about 7% a year. So we have a massive gap right now. And if you look at the commitments that countries have made, it would be 2.4 degrees. If you look at what's been implemented, it would be 3.2 degrees, but we're nowhere close even to well below 2 degrees, let alone the 1.5 degree trajectory that we should be striving to be on. All of us must work together to improve that. If you bottom line, where is the problem? To be honest, the problem is everywhere. So the real assessment is, yes, countries, only 35% of them have a national net zero commitment by 2050. Companies, I'll share a bit more on companies in a second, only 20% are on a 1.5 degree net zero pathway. If you look at it from a technological point of view, about 55% of the technologies we need are cost effective today. That's actually an encouraging thing. On the flip side, 30% of the technologies we need are way off track, and another 15% are still too high cost, if starting to get closer to being cost effective. And on the financing side, we're basically less than half. We're short about $2 trillion a year of the financing that we need. So whether you come at it from a company, a country, a technology, or a financing point of view, we have more work to do. If I double click, just so you have a sense, we took, I don't know, 3 or 4 different databases, of course SBTI, but others as well, to try to assess where are the top 1,000 companies in the world in terms of their commitments. And you can think of it as 20, 40, 40. 20% of companies have made a net zero commitment, though actually it's an even smaller fraction of the 20% that have really been public about what their plans are going to be to get to net zero by 2050, or to actually have delivered in line with, the 5% a year reductions we'd expect to be seeing now. But let's say 20% have plans and have very ambitious goals. Another 40% have some level of a net zero plan or target that they've set up, or a science-based target. It's not on a 1.5 degree pathway, but at least it's something meaningful. But about 40% of companies of the top 1,000 companies don't have any net zero or net zero targets established. So in the corporate world, there's a long way to go. If you shift to the technology side, it also is concerning. As I said, a lot of the technologies are on track and in a reasonable place right now, but the early stage technologies, the ones that are going to be critical, not in this decade necessarily, but absolutely critical in the 30s and 40s, and therefore need a lot of investment now to drive the cost of those technologies down, to begin to scale them up, are critically underfunded. If you look at battery storage, biofuels and biogas, CCUS and DAC, hydrogen, and SAF, combined, they're only getting 2% of our investments in mitigation technologies. And so, again, it's not to underestimate the importance of the technologies that exist today, whether it's renewable energy or EVs or buildings and other things. I'm not minimizing that, but we have to invest more in these early stage technologies in order to get them down. Some of you may have seen it. Bill Gates had an excellent editorial today that highlights why this is so important and why it has to be richer people, richer countries, and richer companies that are leading the charge in this if we're to get these technologies where they need to be in the years ahead. So that's sort of the state of play. I've taken what is a pretty extensive report and boiled into what I think is about 3 minutes. I encourage you to take a look at it. But I want to shift gears in the remaining couple minutes to shift from what's the state of play to what's sort of an overall framing of an action agenda. And I do that because I think that we're going to have a fantastic panel of business leaders to really bring that to life and to the ground of what companies are doing and where we can go even further. I want to start by making one statement that is going to be at the core of the second report that will come out just before the Davos meeting in January. And that is that what we have learned is that while companies and countries individually can act, the sum of those individual actions, even though there are a lot of companies and countries that are leading in this, are doing a lot, are way insufficient for what we need. And therefore, I think it's incumbent on all of us, regardless of what roles we're playing, to say not just what can we do to up our own ambition, but what can we do to be catalysts for systemic change in the broader ecosystem. And that will really be the focus of this next report, of how do we be catalysts to drive broader change when the sum of our individual actions is not close to what we need. And you can come at that from two perspectives. Of course, this group today is mostly a business community, and our alliance is business leaders, so we will focus primarily on what the business community needs to do. I do want to touch briefly on what we need from governments to do. So just quickly, I want to make sure okay, good. We need governments to up their NDCs, and that's part of the next couple of years, is to get bolder NDC commitments. We have to close a 600 gigaton gap in the NDCs in terms of emissions between now and 2050. Second, over and over again, I'm in so many discussions and we hear so many conversations. If we don't track and measure carbon and GHGs across the value chain, and if we don't price the externalities, the impacts that these have, we will not go as fast as we need to go. And so finding a way both to recognize carbon throughout the value chain and to find some way to price, which might be a tax, but doesn't have to. It can be emissions trading systems. It's some of what Europe's attempting to do and getting started on with carbon border adjustment. But we have to have some ways to manage across the system. Third is we need to dramatically accelerate financing. Financing for new technology like the IRA does, the example I gave, but particularly financing for the global south, where we have countries that are bearing the brunt of what's happening in climate, have a massive agenda, and need more support. That was some of what I found so encouraging about yesterday's announcement, was the opportunity to start to raise substantially more money to support that journey. Fourth is we need to focus on what are the obstacles. The most obvious obstacle, if you ask any business, is permitting and just getting the ability to put the assets they have set aside money for into the ground and producing. Thank you. Thanks. But we need to address permitting, but there's other things like skill gaps that are massive issues for many companies where governments can play a major role in doing it. Governments also have the opportunity to be more advanced in their own procurement practices and make a big difference there, where governments have often could do more and aren't, and are dealing with rules or processes that were set up 20, 30 years ago. And then finally, and I say this with hesitancy, but we have to be honest, if we don't make enough progress, then we'll have to think about more drastic measures. And it will be governments that will have to sort through, do we need more hard technology bans? Do we need even stricter rules? Do we need to think about geoengineering? And none of those are pleasant to talk about, and none of those are outcomes that we want to get to. But one way or the other, we are going to realize the cost of inaction is enormous. And so if we can't act in ways today to make progress, then we'll be forced to at least contemplate more dramatic actions down the road. If that's the government agenda on this, the bigger question for the people in this room is what's the business agenda? And that's where the report will put most of its energy, and that's what I want to close with. When you think about systemic change for businesses, we're really talking about 5 areas where individual businesses that are leaders, I suspect like the companies that are in this room right now, can think about where they can drive broader changes in the ecosystems that they're a part of. The first is around accelerating supplier decarbonization, that there are real opportunities to own the value chain for most companies. And I realize every company's in a different boat. For most companies, their supply chain emissions are 4 to 7 times their own scope 1 and 2. That's not true if you're a very upstream player, if you're a steel player, aluminum player. So there are certain heavy emitting sectors where that's not true. But most companies are more downstream facing to consumers or businesses. And for them, their supply chains are absolutely essential. And yet many companies, knowing that it's much easier to focus on the things you control versus things you don't control, have focused on their own scope 1 and 2 and not what they can do to enable, support, encourage, incent their supply bases to decarbonize at a faster pace, even though that's where most of the emissions sit. So that's the first systemic change that companies can pursue. The second is around what they do with their customers. In many cases, I mean, we've surveyed this. Jesper and I were talking. I think he sees some similar things. Many businesses have found customers today, particularly end users, consumers, are not ready to pay a premium for more sustainable products. They want them. They're clear they want them. They want them high percentages, and particularly young people, but they're not ready to pay more. And so the question is, how can we bundle the attributes? How can we show other benefits? What can we do to encourage our customers to adopt different behaviors, and how can we support them? That's the second systemic change. The third is how we work together as industries. This COP will have some wonderful examples. I'm particularly excited about what's happening in food and the agriculture space to work across the value chain to promote regenerative landscapes. But there are many examples where industry players come together and actually remove obstacles, invest in technologies that they need, create common frameworks, improve labeling so that a consumer who goes to a shelf can actually know how to compare the different products on the shelf. There are many ways that a sector can work together. The fourth is how to work together across industries. This is particularly critical in new technologies. I think about Breakthrough Energy Catalyst that's focused on investing in the supply side with a group of companies from across industries that we've had a chance to be a part of, since its founding and seen how much impact that it can have. The First Mover Coalition that Secretary Kerry has driven in partnership with the World Economic Forum. BCG's had a chance to be the knowledge partner there for the last few years. It's all about how do we create more demand commitments for technology across industries. There are many opportunities to accelerate change if we work together. And then finally, and very importantly, it's how does the private sector be a true partner to accelerate progress with the public sector. And I would almost break that into 2 parts. The first is, of course, do no harm. We know in history the private sector has often been a deterrent to the public sector making change through industry associations, through lobbying, through other things. And it's the responsibility of leaders to make sure that their own organizations and the communities they're a part of are appropriately engaging and not deterring action to tackle what we need to do on climate change and climate action. But then second, how to be a positive force. Oftentimes governments have good intent, but don't actually have the skills to design pragmatic solutions that are not overbearing in terms of regulation, won't be a deterrent to progress, will actually be an accelerant. And the private sector has incredible value to contribute to get to smarter public policies, more action-oriented, more pragmatic. So yes, there's a do no harm component, but there's also a very positive component, particularly industry leaders can play if they earn trust with governments and public officials to be able to accelerate progress. So again, that's just a preview of the report and of a great conversation to come. Feike Sybesma, who is our founder of the Alliance and as well as the chair of Philips, is going to now moderate a discussion. And I guess you'll introduce our other panelists. So thank you, everyone.
you, Rich. So, as Gim said and as Rich said, it's important, of course, that we take care that we are a little bit more on track of our Paris Agreement. 200 countries signed. In the last 8 years, we have never had a single year that we were on track. But a lot of things can be done. And a lot of things can be done by the private sector as well. So let me discuss here that with the panel. Jesper Brodin, please take your seat, the CEO of IKEA. Ahmed Galal Ismail, the CEO of a real estate company here in the Emirates, of Majid Al Futtaim. Faisali Sinha of Renew. Is she already there? She's not yet here. And Melanie Nakagawa from Microsoft, please. So thanks for being here. And does the microphone work, by the way? Okay, good. Otherwise I shout more. Jesper, can I start with you, and can I ask all three of you, by the way, to keep your answers and remarks condensed, and then we can have a better interaction and more discussion. So that's a pre-warning. Jesper, maybe start with you. We are not on track. A lot still need to be done. Rich summarized it. Gim said it in the beginning. What is your view of what the public sector should do more in terms of policies or other things, and what can we do much more from the private sector? You are leading that also from an IKEA perspective. Please, Jesper.
So, big question, short answer. I was reflecting actually for all of us listening to you, Rich, in this presentation. The short answer is do what Rich tells us to do. It's actually all there in the plan. It's so complete and it's built on years of understanding and knowledge. I think it's absolutely fabulous. If I would add some sort of 1, 2, 3 on that, I think also from a leadership perspective, I would say number one is, from a company perspective, acknowledge the problem. We can't have companies not starting with the acknowledgement of the issue. It's no longer credible. I think 2, you need to commit to Paris. There is no other starting point, because if you acknowledge the problem, you couldn't go about ignoring that, so to say. 3, get your facts right, get your footprint, scope 1, 2, and 3, so you know where your impact is. Set your targets, get to work, and then all the actions that Rich was putting up, which includes, in the end, that we need to actually have a much stronger collaboration with policymakers in order to make it happen.
Maybe a quick follow-up question, Jesper, and then I go to Ahmed. Do you say, as a company, just do it? I mean, you
Nike took that, unfortunately. So but I agree, you know.
Well, next to the slogan, but I mean, you say just execute, just do it, and companies can do more by just doing it.
I would say the thing that, together with IKEA colleagues in the room as well, that we would love to serve as examples for, not to build our brand, but is to show the economic importance, the economic benefits that are, I think, very often misunderstood. And then on the other side, the brand opportunity, recruiting the best people and the customers of the future. The numbers that me and Rich have been discussing would scare anybody who leads a brand portfolio, if not listening to the consumers of today and of tomorrow. So I would think from an incitament to be on the, still be on the station when the train has left would economically also not make sense.
I agree. Thanks. And by the way, IKEA is a brilliant example, not only in our alliance of 125 companies, but sticking out also of taking the lead. Ahmed, can I come to you as a big real estate company here in the region, dealing with supply chains, dealing with a lot of materials, dealing with a lot of emissions also, not only in your scope 1, 2, but especially in your scope 3, the more complicated thing. How do you look to that and further greening your own operations?
Well, first of all, I think it's fair to admit that it's already very hot. I've been walking to the room today, I thought I'd taking off my jacket as well. And it is very hot, and it's getting a lot hotter in this part of the world where we operate. We operate 2 major businesses, a very significant real estate business, but we're also the large grocery operator here in the region. And we see a future where the average temperatures are up, if we miss the trajectory as we are today, up 3, 4, maybe 5 degrees. So you can imagine this part of the world being 4 to 5 degrees hotter, and the knock-on effect it has on water availability, which is already scarce, arable land, which is very, very limited, and air conditioning, buildings, etc. So we see it as existential, really, for our customers, our communities, and our business. Specifically on real estate, I think it's a very hard question around Scope 3. I think one of the things that I'd really like to highlight, it takes courage. I think it takes courage to acknowledge the difficulty of the problem and the difficulty to change it. It takes courage to disclose the extent to which each company is actually impacting Scope 3. So we did the first embodied carbon baseline study here in the region. And we discovered that all of our real estate is on average embodying 20% more carbon than the global benchmark. And we disclosed that. And then we made a very public commitment that on all new developments, we're going to reduce embodied carbon by 20%. We met it in some buildings, in other developments we missed it, and we disclosed that we missed. And I think that courage to acknowledge both progress that we're making as well as shortcomings is very important to encourage others to follow. Only 12% of companies in our part of the world have a net zero commitment, and only 7% have committed to a pathway. So I think speaking up with courage on the problems, successes, and failures is important to catalyze everything that the BCG report has highlighted.
Appreciate it, and compliments to, indeed, like you said, the courage, just to publish also the inconvenient messages about your own company, and using that as a driver to further improve. I think that is the way to go. So thanks for leading that. Can I go to you, Melanie, from Microsoft, responsible for sustainability in the company? And of course, this is a big issue for Microsoft also. So how do you see your company leading this pathway, and what other companies, you have a lot of clients which you help and interact also with, and can improve also? Please, Melanie.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me here this morning and to the live streamed audience. Hi. You're not as hot as we are, maybe, perhaps. So for Microsoft, we set back in 2020 pretty ambitious goals. And to your point about courage and being transparent, we set these goals to be carbon negative, water positive, zero waste, and protect ecosystems all by 2030. And the carbon negative has been an interesting one because it's not just reducing as much as we can, it's also removing the rest of those emissions that we cannot reduce through our own systems. And it's across scopes 1, 2, and 3. And so the progress that we're making on these is something that we've been really transparent about. We put out an annual report every year, and we put out, we have just a numbers page as well to do exactly what Amit said, which is how do you be really forthcoming in with the progress that you're making in these spaces. But for Microsoft, it's not just about what are we doing with our own operations and how do we make progress to those. It also includes how do we work with our customers, our value chain, our supply chain to give them the tools that allow them to participate in their own sustainability journey. So you think about the supply chain of my colleagues here, how do you make sure that their supply chain is putting in the data around their emissions, their water footprint, so that we can then, our scope 3, be able to reliably and transparently report on this. And then the last piece is really why we're all here at COP, which is that global impact we can all have as businesses. We're here because we want to talk to policymakers and talk among peers. And that's also where, for Microsoft, we're looking at what are the things we're doing to help enable global change. So back in 2020, we announced a $1 billion climate innovation fund. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about financing here at this COP. And so we've deployed around $700 million into really innovative, first-of-its-kind technologies and companies to help all of our companies succeed to close that gap that Rich talked about, which is we got to move faster and quicker.
Right. Thanks for that, and thanks for the efforts that you and Microsoft are taking in this respect. Can I be with the panel a little bit more provocative? We're here at the COP. We are here in this room with the CEO Climate Leaders Alliance. We're here with businesses. We have 3 business leaders here on stage. But the COP is being steered by countries. The countries here are negotiating. And we, business NGOs, are the entourage around it. Because we are not in the main negotiating room. In the main negotiating room, there are, as it be, the heads of state and the ministers. Now, I'm in a good company here to dare to be provocative, because Sultan Al Jaber at the COP presidency said also, should the private sector not play an even more prominent role in this COP negotiations by maybe making sectorial arrangements globally, which creates an automatically, if you make global arrangements in certain business sectors, you have a level playing field per definition, and make those commitments also. I'm not saying that the public sector is not doing the job, although after 28 COPs we cannot say that we're 100% on track. So is there a role here also, just a question of the private sector playing a more dominant role also in this COP negotiation? Since we have 4 business leaders, and thanks also Feike of Renew joining us, and I start immediately with this provocative question to you, and how you see the role of your company in this one.
Well, thank you for the provocative question, slightly provoked by my entry this morning, because it's been complex getting in, but it's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you to the forum for organizing this very important session. My view is that, whether it is the private sector, or whether it is the civil societies and the NGOs on the ground, who are pretty important, or whether it is the communities and also the government, I think none of us can work independently. And it's important that all of us work together. It's important that the government has enabling policies, and it's really fantastic to see the kind of initiatives governments around the world are taking to set personal ambitions. So I can speak about my country, India. I think our Prime Minister is quite committed and has set ambitious targets for our country. We have already accomplished our goals, which we set at Paris for using less than 40% fossil fuels. Now we are ahead of the target by, I think, 9 years. There is ambition. That's great. We, as a company, we're just about 10 years old, and.
But if I may, I love your compliments to your own government.
Okay.
Per definition.
Right.
And with that to all governments in the world, per definition. They are the public sector, so we serve them. But we are not on track. Most governments are not on track globally. At the COP, we do the global stock taking. We are not on track. So next to all the compliments and all the complexity, please comment. We are not on track.
Yeah.
With our own agreement signed by almost 200 governmental leaders in 2015.
Yeah, I'll just complete because, I know I didn't want to just compliment the government. I was just coming to the point that, yes, only, I think, 20% of the private sector has committed to science-based targets. Right. And we are one of the few in India in our sector who's done that. I think there's a lot of scope for the private sector to take stock. I think we need to take the conversations out of the boardroom, on the ground, on the field, and get things done on the ground. I think businesses like us in developing world are doing what we can to provide not only the business models, the employment, enabling the communities. I think that's a small step in the right direction. So I'll end there and come back again with more.
Okay, very good, very good. And you make good point of the number of companies who signed up for the SBTI targets, let's say the derivative of the Paris Agreement for the business sector. And next to the criticism you can give to governments that we are not on track, many companies have not done enough either. Jesper, how do you look to my maybe a little bit provocative remark, but I felt stimulated by the COP presidency, so then
I don't think it's a provocative question. I think it's the right question, honestly. This is compared to many of you, I'm a novice into this world. It's my 4th COP, and this time my hopes for more intervention was there, because there was a lot of discussion, but I don't think we will achieve it. On the positive note, if I understand it right, Glasgow was about 30,000 people, Sharm was about 70, and now it's heading towards 110,000 people. Now that tells us there's an enormous opportunity of people with engagement, NGOs, companies, youth, and of course political, everybody's here. And wouldn't it be an enormous failure for all of us if we're a couple of meters ahead, next to each other here. We don't take that opportunity. So I would like to maybe propose, with all the respect of the negotiators that needs to happen between countries, I would love to, looking at ourselves in WEF and the Climate Alliance, to maybe try to take the lead to get a bit practical on to what terms could we enter the negotiations. If I understand it right, Pim Feike, the alliance with about 130 members today,
Correct.
adding up the carbon footprint, and these are the good news with this bad news, is that these are the committed ones, because the footprint is right up there among the biggest countries in the world. So I think we don't have a government, but I think there should be some sort of mechanism that we are part of the negotiatings for E.
Yeah. No, a fair point. And by the way, Jesper and myself as co-chairs of the Alliance are very proud to with Pim as our leader from the World Economic Forum, with the CEO Climate Leaders Alliance of 125 big companies. Kim is supporting us, being progressive on climate. And I made a joke a couple of times. Last year in Egypt, when I explained this to Minister Shukri, he really was impressed. And he said, Mamma mia, 125. He said, 125. Unbelievable, what an alliance, 125,000 companies, and you have organized it. I said, no, Minister, with 125, I meant 125. He said, oh.
But the carbon footprint is bigger than Japan, bigger than the US.
That is true, not to be proud of, by the way. But I agree that we would be the third largest country in the world if you count it by emissions, but we want to be the size of Monaco. I think, like you were saying, and you also from Renewal, we can do much more from the private sector also. Ahmed, please, how do you look to that? I mean, this is your area, this is your region, this is your city where we all hosted by. Should we have a different or more dominant role or step up much more forward as a business sector in this whole COP discussions?
I think the private sector can lean in a lot more. I mean, I think it's fair to say that nobody is doing enough. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be looking at the numbers we just saw. So there's certainly more scope for governments to up the ambition, but there is a bigger scope for the private sector to lean in. I think one area where perhaps governments can play a big role, and there was a suggestion that there has to be a price on carbon. One of the big issues is that there is a negative price on carbon in many places around the world, including some of the markets where we operate, where there's huge fuel subsidies. And as much as we need to talk about a carbon premium, we need to eliminate the carbon subsidy that's embedded in all of the markets where we operate. I think there are also areas where the private sector can take the lead. Yesterday, we launched the First Mover Coalition for Food Systems with the World Economic Forum. Food is 30% of emissions, 70% of water consumption, and 100% of the food we eat, obviously. So it's a very important system. And the private sector can clearly lead on aggregating demand. And we're only talking about, I would say, less than a handful of crops. If we tackle or produce beef, rice, and dairy, we would significantly move the needle in one of the most critical food sort of systems and emitting systems in the world. The other thing is that there is a big intersection between private sector and government. Especially in many emerging markets where there are many private actors that are either state-owned enterprises or state-influenced enterprises. So it's difficult to draw the distinction between the private sector and the public sector, but certainly scope for everyone to do a lot more.
Thank you. Please, thank you. And it's very true, and also this collaboration between the public and the private sector. Please.
No, I would love to add to that. So prior to this, I actually served in the Biden White House and worked on a lot on these climate negotiations in various capacities. And so it's fantastic to be back. I think I started at COP12. So Jesper, welcome. You're only 4 years in. But I would say you're exactly right. The transition that has happened in these negotiations from when I first started coming here to what it's like now, the incredible richness of the private sector participation is really critical and vital. And to your provocative question, which I really like, I think there's a really important role for, one of the things for Microsoft, we always say for Microsoft to succeed, the world needs to succeed. And as global businesses, like some of us here are, we don't benefit unless the world actually advances in their commitments and their goals for us to reach ours. 96% of Microsoft's emissions that we report on are actually scope 3, which means that is global supply chains, that's the countries we operate in. So we find ourselves having a lot of discussions with policymakers, and then this goes to your private sector question. I think there's a lot of value in many of our companies, especially across sectors, coming together and talking with policymakers about common threads that are important to all of us. So I would venture clean energy grids. For many of our countries, or many of our companies, having clean energy grids move faster is going to benefit all of us. It's going to benefit all of our scope 3. It's going to benefit someone's scope 1 and scope 2 from a manufacturing perspective. And that's a common point. And so as companies can come together from the tech industry and others. The other point that I just wanted to add to, because you mentioned the First Movers Coalition, what I get really excited about, just as a data point, what he's proposing or saying about what we can do as companies to create new markets, we've already done in as private sector. So the example I would give is power purchase agreements, clean energy markets. The tech sector years ago raised their hand and said, look, we really need large-scale clean energy coming online at a much rapid pace. And we started to move forward with making large agreements around power purchase agreements and clean energy procurement. And that has really driven an incredible market in this space. So how do we do that for cement? How do we do that for steel? We're doing that now for sustainable aviation fuel. And these are all things that would benefit many of us here, but I'm excited because we've seen successes already happen when corporates lead and policy enables our success.
No, very, very good. I appreciate it. And that builds further indeed on the statement I made, the statement also Al Jaber made before. Maybe we should make stronger sectorial agreements on a global scale. And that can be different in different sectors. And let's be honest, the oil and gas industry does not compete with the toy industry. So we can have one set of agreements different than another set of agreements. And the advantage of sectorial agreements is that it is per definition leveling playing field, which countries cannot do because their jurisdiction stops at the border. So it's very interesting. Faisali, I come to you. You mentioned, of course, also the progress and also the not progress being made. I'm interested, by the way, by all panelists. What is holding us back? We agree that we need to step up as private sector. We agree that we can influence a lot. We agree that the collaboration between public and private sector is important, that we can do more. What is holding us back? Why are we as a private sector not doing more? Is it our shareholders who don't want it? Is it that technology which is not yet there? Or is it that the policies are lacking? And please don't say it's all of the above. What is the most important thing holding us back?
If I could say that, I want to take a slightly different view. I'm wearing the good hat today. So I want to say that, with Microsoft as well, with various other companies, our PPAs with them to help them decarbonize has increased by 35% over the last year itself. So in India and even in, with some of the global companies. So that, to me, shows that, companies are committed. Companies are getting it, and they're getting it because the regulators are asking for it, investors are asking for it, and with that comes a business need to do it and a personal commitment to drive it. So just to give you a sense, Renew itself, we removed power from our name to become Renew and to move our business to become decarbonization partners to Global Inc. And so I would say that would be one step in which we as a company are helping other companies to decarbonize.
Thank you. And by the way, thank you, Faisal, also for correcting a little bit my Dutch glass half full perspective into the glasses also half empty is also half full by all the group progress we make as companies. Jesper, to you, but still help me a little bit. How can we make more progress? Because I love to see the glass half full. But if I listen to Gim in the introduction, if I listen to Rich, there's still more to be done. And what could help us overcoming those hurdles?
I think it's an interesting one. I share your deep optimism about what's going on, but I also have never been so worried as now, and it's a strange feeling. It's one hand on the stove and one in the fridge, so the average temperature is okay, right? So I think, I would like to then lean on what's not good enough. And I think what's lacking is courage. Being in IKEA, leading a group of IKEA that is foundation-based, I recognize that my assignment is probably quite easy compared to some CEOs out there. But you know what? There is, in the acknowledgement of the problem and the opportunity and the need of acting here now, there are basically black ink on the paper. Not enough companies and leaders are stepping up. So I think we need more courage.
And what is hampering some CEOs of showing that courage?
Well, when you speak to people, it's obviously the transition from pure capitalism to stakeholder capitalism is one of the, and how to navigate that. There are a lot of skillful leaders out there who are finding the pathway, and we've also seen some brilliant CEOs having to step down because they were ahead of the game. So it's not easy, I acknowledge that, but at the same time I think we need to, every leader today needs to be able to choose between, in a way, your own self-respect or your position here. And I believe there is enough data for every intelligent person to say, I need to be part of that solution.
Appreciate. Ahmed, how do you look to that? Is it technology? Is it shareholders? Is it policies? Or is it indeed, like Jesper was saying, to a large degree, courage? And by the way, you showed the courage yourself and in your company to say, hey, we're not doing well enough, and let's be open and transparent. That's a lot of courage. And it forces you also to further improve. How do you say this?
All of the above? Is that an acceptable answer? I think there has to be a big mindset shift, almost like a green sort of leadership mindset that needs to emerge. And that mindset is difficult in an environment where the incentives are not obvious as well as the downside is not obvious. So I think that the evolution of capital markets, the evolution of regulatory frameworks will help nudge people across the line. That's very important. I think in our part of the world, we've been reflecting about why so many, I would say, business leaders, the majority of them actually haven't come out and sort of made these commitments. And I'm afraid we're sometimes a victim of green hushing, because whatever your starting point is, you need to start somewhere and you need to take a first step. And the first step is never big enough or good enough. And if you take a step forward that's not big enough or good enough, and you find yourself continuously subjected to unfair criticism, etc., as we've seen, yesterday and the day before in certain media outlets, it actually leads some leaders to self-regulate. And they might be doing some, but they don't want to talk about it, and it's sort of green hushes a lot of voices that really have the courage to act. So that's something that we need to think about. How can we continue to be transparent, act with courage, speak up, but also be fair in the assessment of progress and challenges ahead without sort of disencouraging the business leaders, who are sometimes, it's a very difficult move and could cost you your career, could cost you, your stock price, etc., to take that step forward. Yeah.
I would like to go to Melanie, and I would like to come back to the green hushing of you. I think it's an important element also. Maybe Melanie first.
So like a good lawyer, I'm going to pick something that's not on your list. And I'm going to pick education. So I think what is required is to pull all these threads together is actually education about what's happening in this space. So I would put education in two baskets. One is of the successes. I think that's the reason what's holding us back is that there's not enough understanding of where the market is today in terms of how we can get it to this scale. So as an example, I would say is carbon removal, direct air capture. That was on Rich's slide in the category of not enough investments going there. And I think part of that is because the successes that can come from this technology is not clearly known, and there's some concern about it. And I say this, of course, in full transparency, Microsoft is the largest corporate buyer of carbon removal on the market to date. We also invest in companies that are helping to scale this market. So we helped invest in bringing the two first-of-its-kind projects online, both in the United States and in the European Union. And to your point, though, we've gone out in front on this, and we've put out 3 white papers that explain our methodology, the contracting, because we get some pushback that say, wait, is this the right approach? And we said, look, the IPCC has said we need removal, And who's going to be funding that removal? Who's going to support that market? It's not going to happen overnight or by itself. It needs companies stepping out to say, we understand what the science is dictating us to go do, and we need to create a market around that, and that's what we're doing in this space. But the education of the successes that can come from removal, I think, is really important. So we got to talk about a flywheel success, and the second is, how do you get the right skills among our employees, among policymakers, to really understand what is happening in the world, and then what are the barriers to that success. And that goes to, again, to where, if you look at long duration battery storage, all of those pieces, those are all really important technologies that need to reach scale. And I think we need to talk about where the success is happening in those spaces, with the goal to get more financing and investment into those markets.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you for raising the point of education. I think it's a very important one, and thanks for all the work that you do at Microsoft for this. Can I build further on what you said, Ahmed, about the green hushing, and maybe what I felt over the last year, that some companies, building on your green hushing, some companies become more nervous. And why? Because at this moment there are 3,000 legal court cases against companies not delivering on their targets. So all kinds of NGOs, etc., start court cases. 3,000. There are 60 court cases against countries, 3,000 against companies. The Shell case is maybe one of the most visible one in the world. And maybe I start with you, Ahmed, because you created partly your own problem, becoming very open where you are and not enough. There were companies doing that also who were sued afterwards. I mean, how do you look to that? Because I personally think, by the way, that all those legal cases, maybe they serve a purpose, but if the consequence is that companies are more resistant of setting their targets, sharing, being open and transparent like you were, then we are doing the wrong thing, to be honest. How do you see that?
I mean, I often wonder what's the alternative. I mean, the alternative is not to disclose. The alternative is not to set ambitious targets. And perhaps if we follow that safer route, I'm pretty sure we won't be able to course correct as we saw in the data. So I think there's no alternative really. And I think there is also a bit of a moral duty that we need to think about. I mean, there is a moral duty. I mean, in the Middle East and North Africa, 4 to 5 degrees is going to be suffocating for people and for communities. It's going to make parts of, my homeland, my city unlivable. So there is, I think, a broader, I would say, role for business to think about beyond sort of the immediate risks commercially, legally, and perhaps otherwise.
Thanks for saying that and bringing, indeed, and a correct hand of the public here, bringing the moral component at the table. Fashade, how do you?
Yeah, I wanted to come in. I would say that I'd like to add 3 pieces to what Ahmed said. One is a patience for profitability by some. So we need to have a long-term view, and we need to also be able to take some pain to get there. I think that's what's going to prevent a little bit of the greenwashing, where financial institutions kind of provide that capital required in certain geographies to be able to develop projects in certain countries, where I think communities feel empowered and have to, kind of get the shareholder value creation, and there is development, and that's when in countries like Africa, etc., you can see progress, and we can help the vulnerable communities. I also wanted to say the other thing. This panel won't be complete by slightly kind of giving you the other side of the glass half empty perspective. And I wanted to say one thing which the private sector must do is work on the supply chain side. How can we green the supply chain? How can we make it more sustainable? I think there's a huge amount of work which needs to be done there. And firsthand, I can can say that during COVID, all of us experienced the disruption which comes with the supply chain disruption. So, with that also comes opportunities we've seen. So, for example, we make solar panels, and because of the restrictions from importing from China, even by our shareholders and investors, often we have to build our own manufacturing facilities, and we have to work with vendors to help them to become greener and more sustainable in their operations. So that's my bit on.
Yeah, very
what we
good,
must
and
do.
thanks for bringing that point up. And switch to you, Melanie, on this one. But the whole supply chain, and for many companies, that is their scope 3, which is factors bigger than, of course, their own scope 1 and 2. So very important. Melanie.
About scope 3?
Well, about maybe, we touched on two issues. We touched the issue of the lawsuits and being open, and we touch the responsibility we have also of our supply chains.
So as I mentioned, it is much bigger. It's 96% of our emissions is scope 3. And that's really why we put in place, and this goes back to understanding where everything is. So where's the data? Where's the measurement? You cannot manage what you cannot measure. And that's another sort of key tenet to the way we operate. And so how do you have the right data platform and data estate to understand where your scope 3 is? For Microsoft, we've been able to disaggregate where our scope 3 comes from. It's what you would expect probably. It's semiconductor chips, it's building materials, it's electricity consumption, it's procured products, our goods and service, our value chain. So when you break it up in that way, it actually becomes not bite-sized, unless you're a very hungry eater, but they become chunks, if you will, of sectors to go after with partners to identify with our supply chain, how can we start to bring down the embodied carbon of building materials? I love your comment about you've asked your embodied carbon to come down by X percent. Right. It's those types of relation projects that actually start to bring down corporate scope 3, but it also gives us a platform to engage policymakers to say, what do I need for greener cement? We invested in a company called Carbon Cure that does a lower carbon cement. We're looking at ways to the model of book and claim models, which is modeled after the PPA market, where you can look at how do you pay the green premium for some of these hard-to-abate categories. We've invested in funds like Just Climate to help invest in the projects that are going to get at this the hard-to-abate industrial category, and that's the role that corporates can play. We can use our venture funding, we can use our equity funding, we can use our procurement power, which is actually quite powerful to start to move these markets so that our scope 3 comes down, but it also enables countries to get closer towards their own commitments.
Thanks. Very important, very important. Before I close and round off, Jesper, our co-chair also of the Alliance, your views on the last part of the discussion, please.
Well, I was having a beautiful moment there. I was asking for courage, and I was just enjoying your courage in sharing exactly what I sit with. I was reflecting on the aspect of how we show up, and I think it's better to be 80% right than 100% silent, right, in this topic, and then we have to be prepared to deal with some of the blows, but not to make ourselves smaller than we are as leaders also. If your intentions are right, people will forgive you for some mistakes on the way. And what you need to, of course, you need to work with alliances and be proactive in that. And I'm sure we will be able to make it through here. The opposite approach, as you say, silence for yourself, as I heard you said, also for your self-respect, would not be a good option. But I think maybe the topic that I think is also to bring into the room also is, as we are now countries are putting peer pressure on each other, businesses, companies are putting on each other. We all need to look around us and say who's on this journey and who's not. And I think this is the opportunity this week for the energy sector and for oil and gas to step up and say we acknowledge the issue and we're going to be part of the solution. And I believe that this is the moment because, again, looking at the numbers from BCG and Rich, with all of my optimism, if we don't get that right, we are not on the right trajectory. So I would also like to call out that I think it's a collective effort for us to make sure everybody's aboard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesper, and thank you all for being here. I want to round off on time, not to come into a fight with Pim and Kim, because that is my higher goal in life. So appreciate all to be here in the audience. Like we said, we are not on track, but we have clear ambitions of the public sector. Here we meet here with the private sector, see the CEOs here on stage and taking up their responsibility. There are many others in the room. Here I see my good friend Koen also taking his responsibility, also in the building and construction industry. So many take the responsibility, but we are not yet there. And like many panelists said, of course it has to do with courage, it has to do with your moral, it has to do with sticking out your neck, just report like you did that you're not on track and you want to do better. And of course, let's realize most of the emissions are coming from the private sector, not from the public sector itself. And the private sector has the technologies, the innovations also to improve. And you see examples here on stage and here in the room of companies who do so. I can only encourage you, please do the same. Please, and if you want to learn more about the Alliance, contact Pim of the World Economic Forum, and then we can help you sharing experiences of these 125 companies, because we love to share that with other companies and letting them stepping forward also. Thanks all for being here. Thanks all panelists. Thanks people in the audience, and of course the World Economic Forum to organizing and helping this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Feike.